The massive space station orbiting Proxima Centauri buzzed with activity as representatives from 12 different galactic civilizations gathered for the annual interspecies military exchange. Commander Zethkar of the Vraxian Empire adjusted his ceremonial armor, the purple metal gleaming under the artificial lights. Around him, officers from various alien species mingled, their conversations filled with boastful tales of conquest and military superiority. "Humans!" scoffed General Tokmiran, his forearms gesturing dismissively. The insectoid warrior's mandibles clicked with amusement. "I still cannot believe the Galactic Council granted them membership in our military alliance. What could such a primitive species possibly contribute?" Captain Veltara, her blue-scaled skin shimmering, joined the conversation. "I've reviewed their submission files. They've only been in space for, 70 Earth years? We've been conquering star systems for millennia. The Altarian Confederacy alone has subjugated over 300 worlds." The gathering fell silent as a human delegation entered the central hall. Leading them was Ambassador Sarah Chen, flanked by several military officers in what the aliens had learned was called dress uniform. The humans moved with purpose, their faces calm and professional despite the obvious disdain from the surrounding aliens. What caught everyone's attention, however, was the colorful piece of fabric one of the human officers carried. It was red, white, and blue, with white stars scattered across a blue field and alternating red and white stripes. To the aliens, it looked like a primitive tribal banner. Completely out of place in this sophisticated gathering of galactic powers. "Is that supposed to be their battle standard?" whispered Subcommander Nexus, her tentacles writhing with suppressed laughter. "It looks like something a child might design." Ambassador Chen approached the central podium, her spine straight and her voice clear. "Honored representatives of the Galactic Military Alliance, I present Earth's formal entry into your ranks. We bring our commitment to peace, our dedication to protecting the innocent, and our flag as a symbol of the values we uphold." The human officer stepped forward and carefully placed the American flag on the display stand reserved for each species' military symbol. Around them, other banners hung proudly. The golden spiral of the Centaurian Empire, the crystalline formation representing the silicon hegemony, the flowing energy pattern of the plasmic collective. Compared to these sophisticated designs, the human flag looked almost quaint. General Tokmiran's laughter echoed through the hall. "Stripes and stars, this is what represents human military might? My hatchlings could design something more intimidating." Other aliens joined in the mockery. Captain Veltara pointed at the flag with one of her clawed fingers. "What do those patterns even mean? Are they random colors thrown together? Where are the symbols of conquest, the marks of defeated enemies?" "Perhaps," suggested Commander Zethkar with a cruel smile, "those stripes represent the number of times they've surrendered in battle, and the stars might be all the worlds they've failed to conquer." The laughter grew louder, more vicious. Representatives from species that had never even acknowledged Earth's existence now felt free to ridicule humanity's military traditions. The human delegation stood silently, their faces betraying no emotion, but the tension in their shoulders was visible to any observer. Ambassador Chen waited for the mockery to die down before speaking again. "This flag has flown over many battlefields. Each element has meaning that runs deeper than conquest or subjugation." "Meaning?" General Tokmiran's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme amusement among his species. "The only meaning that matters in military affairs is strength. How many worlds have you conquered under that colorful banner? How many species have you brought to heel?" "Humans are pacifists by nature," declared Captain Veltara with authority, despite having never met a human before this day. "I've read their files. They spend more resources on entertainment and art than on weapons development. They actually have laws protecting civilians during warfare. What kind of warrior species protects their enemies?" The mockery reached its peak when Sub-Commander Nexus approached the flag display. Her tentacles danced around the American flag, mimicking its patterns in the air. Perhaps we should add some proper military symbols to this decoration. Maybe some conquest markers or battle scars to give it actual meaning. The human delegation remained motionless, but something changed in the air around them. The other officers had taken positions that seemed casual, but were anything but random. Their eyes constantly scanned the room, cataloging exits, potential threats, and defensive positions. To the aliens, it looked like nervous behavior. To anyone who understood military bearing, it was the stance of professionals assessing a potentially hostile environment. "Tell me," Commander Zethkar addressed Ambassador Chen directly, "has this flag ever flown over a victory that mattered? Has it ever inspired fear in your enemies or respect from your allies?" Before Ambassador Chen could respond, General Tokmiran interjected with another wave of laughter. "Fear? From humans? The only thing this banner might inspire is confusion about which planet sells the most colorful fabrics." The insults continued for several more minutes, each alien representative trying to outdo the others in their creative mockery of the human flag and the species it represented. They spoke of humanity's short time in space, their apparent weakness, their strange concepts of honor and civilian protection. To these warriors from aggressive, expansionist civilizations, human military doctrine seemed not just weak, but incomprehensible. What none of them noticed was the subtle change in the human delegation's posture when the main doors to the hall opened once again. Ambassador Chen's eyes flicked toward the entrance, and the slightest smile crossed her lips before disappearing. The other human officers straightened almost imperceptibly, their previous tension replaced by something that looked almost like anticipation. The aliens were too busy laughing at their own jokes to notice the newcomer entering the hall. They were too absorbed in their mockery to see the way the humans' entire demeanor shifted. They were too confident in their superiority to realize that everything was about to change. Because walking through those doors, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had never needed to prove his worth with words, was a man whose very presence would redefine their understanding of what the human flag truly represented. He wore the same dress uniform as the other humans, but something about him was different. Something in his bearing, in the way his eyes assessed the room, in the controlled power of his movements, marked him as something entirely other than what these aliens expected from humanity. The mockery continued, growing ever more vicious, but the sound seemed to fade into background noise as this new human made his way through the crowd. He moved like water, flowing around obstacles, his path taking him inevitably toward the center of the hall where the flags stood, and where his people endured the ridicule of those who had never truly understood the meaning of strength. The newcomer reached the edge of the crowd, just as Sub-Commander Nexus was suggesting they use the human flag as decoration for the station's waste disposal unit. He stood there quietly, hands clasped behind his back, listening to the continued mockery with an expression that revealed nothing. His uniform bore no fancy decorations, no ceremonial armor like the aliens wore, just simple ribbons and insignia that meant nothing to the galactic representatives. General Tokmiran noticed him first and gestured with one of his 4 arms. "Ah, another human joins us. Come, tell us about your pretty banner. Does it have special powers? Does it make your enemies laugh themselves to death?" The man stepped forward, his movements measured and precise. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried clearly across the hall. "Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez, United States Navy SEALs." The title meant nothing to the aliens, but Ambassador Chen's eyes lit up with something that might have been relief. The other human officers seemed to stand a little straighter, their confidence visibly increasing. "Navy SEALs?" Captain Veltara's scales rippled with amusement. "What is a SEAL? Some kind of aquatic creature?" Do you train with animals? Rodriguez looked at her with steady eyes. Something like that. How charming, Commander Zethkar interjected. The humans send an animal trainer to represent their military might. This becomes more amusing by the moment. The Master Chief's gaze swept across the assembled aliens, taking in their elaborate armor, their ceremonial weapons, their obvious pride in their military accomplishments. I couldn't help but notice you folks were discussing our flag. Discussion is too generous a term, Sub-Commander Nexus said, her tentacles still dancing mockingly. We were wondering why a species would choose such a primitive symbol. No conquered worlds, no defeated enemies, no proper military imagery at all. Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. You're right about one thing. Those 13 stripes don't represent conquered worlds. 13? General Takmiran's mandibles clicked with interest. What significance could such a small number have? They represent 13 colonies that decided they didn't want to be ruled by someone else anymore, Rodriguez said simply. 13 groups of people who were tired of being told what to do by an empire that considered them inferior. The mockery in the room began to fade, as something in the human's tone suggested there was more to this story. Captain Veltara leaned forward. And the stars? Surely those represent something more than wishful thinking? 50 stars. One for each state that joined together as equals. No conquered territories, no subjugated peoples, just 50 different groups who decided they were stronger together than apart. Commander Zethkar waved dismissively. Pretty words, but what does any of that mean in battle? How does a flag of cooperation and equality inspire fear in your enemies? Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, but somehow more dangerous. You want to know about fear? Let me tell you what that flag has flown over. He gestured to the American flag hanging in the display. It flew over a beach called Normandy, where humans charged into certain death to free people they'd never met from an evil they couldn't tolerate. 5,000 died in a single day, but they kept coming. The aliens shifted uncomfortably. They understood casualties, but not sacrifice for strangers. It flew over a place called Iwo Jima, where humans fought for weeks to take one small island, not for resources or territory, but because it was one step closer to ending a war. 7,000 died for 8 square miles of volcanic rock. General Takmiran's laughter was more forced now. Death happens in all wars. This proves nothing. Rodriguez continued as if he hadn't spoken. It flew over the Chosan Reservoir, where 15,000 humans were surrounded by 120,000 enemies in the worst winter in decades. They were outnumbered 8-1, freezing, cut off from supplies. You know what they did? The room was silent now. They fought their way out, all of them, carrying their wounded, bringing their dead, refusing to leave anyone behind. The enemy commander said later he'd never seen anything like it. Said they didn't retreat, they just attacked in a different direction. Sub-Commander Nexus's tentacles had stopped their mocking dance. But surely these were special circumstances. It flew over a firebase called Khe-San, where 6,000 humans held off 40,000 enemies for 77 days. Cut off, bombarded constantly. No resupply except what they could fly in under fire. They could have surrendered. They could have retreated. Instead, they held the line because that's what the mission required. Rodriguez's voice grew quieter, more intense. It flew over Mogadishu, where 19 humans died fighting to save the crew of a crashed helicopter. They could have left them. Standard procedure said to withdraw, but that flag doesn't represent standard procedure. It represents the promise that no one gets left behind. Captain Veltara's scales had lost their shimmer. These are impressive tales, but it flew over Afghanistan, Rodriguez continued relentlessly, where humans spent 20 years fighting an enemy that hid among civilians, that used children as shields, that booby-trapped schools and hospitals. and those humans still followed rules of engagement that protected those same civilians who might be harboring the enemy. Commander Zethkar's voice was less certain now. That seems tactically unsound. Rodriguez looked directly at him. That's because you don't understand what that flag really represents. You see weakness where there's actually something much more dangerous. And what's that? General Tokmiran asked, his mandibles no longer clicking with amusement. Humans who believe in something bigger than themselves. Humans who'll die before they'll break their word. Humans who'll walk into hell itself if that's what justice requires. The Master Chief stepped closer to the flag display, his movement causing several aliens to unconsciously step back. You want to know why this flag scares our enemies? It's not because of what we've conquered. It's because of what we've freed. It's not because of who we've killed. It's because of who we've saved. He turned back to face the assembled aliens, and for the first time, they saw something in his eyes that made them remember why their species had evolved fear as a survival mechanism. Every tyrant, every dictator, every species that's ever tried to rule through force alone has learned the same lesson eventually. That flag represents humans who don't stay down when you hit them, humans who get stronger when you hurt them, humans who'll keep coming long after any reasonable species would have given up. The silence in the hall was profound. The mockery had died completely, replaced by something that felt almost like respect, though none of the aliens would have admitted it. Rodriguez wasn't finished. You laugh at our rules of engagement, our protection of civilians, our refusal to use the most devastating weapons in our arsenal. You think it makes us weak. He smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. You have no idea how wrong you are. Master Chief Rodriguez stepped closer to the center of the group, his presence somehow filling the space despite his unremarkable appearance. The aliens found themselves forming an unconscious circle around him, drawn by something they couldn't quite identify, but instinctively respected. You want to understand what that flag really means? Rodriguez asked quietly. Let me tell you about restraint. General Tokmiran shifted uncomfortably. Restraint is not a virtue in warfare, isn't it? Rodriguez's eyes locked onto the insectoid general. Let me tell you about a weapon my people developed. We call it Little Boy. Primitive by your standards, probably. Just nuclear fission, really. We dropped it on a city called Hiroshima. The aliens listened with growing unease as Rodriguez described the devastation in simple clinical terms. The instant vaporization, the radiation sickness, the shadow burns on concrete walls. 3 days later, we dropped another one. Fat Man, we called it. Nagasaki. Between the two bombs, over 200,000 dead, most of them civilians. Captain Veltara's scales had turned a pale blue. This sounds like something our species would do in conquest. Total warfare. Rodriguez nodded. It was. And you know what happened next? The aliens waited. We never used them again. Not once. In 70 years of conflicts, rebellions, wars, and interventions, not once did we use nuclear weapons again. We had thousands of them. We still do. Weapons that make Little Boy look like a firecracker. Weapons that could glass entire continents. Sub-Commander Nexus's tentacles writhed nervously. But surely, when faced with extinction, Korea. We were pushed back to a tiny perimeter around Busan, facing complete defeat. The enemy had nearly 1 million men. Our commander requested permission to use nuclear weapons. Rodriguez paused. Permission denied. Commander Zethkar leaned forward despite himself. You chose defeat over victory? We chose to find another way. And we did. We landed at Incheon, cut their supply lines, turned the entire war around, without burning half a continent to ash. Rodriguez began to pace slowly, his movement hypnotic. Vietnam, 58,000 American dead. We could have ended it in an afternoon with nuclear fire. Permission requested multiple times. Answer always the same. No. This makes no strategic sense, General Takamiran protested, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Doesn't it? Let me tell you about a concept you might not understand. Earning the right to lead. Rodriguez stopped pacing and faced the assembled aliens directly. You see strength in conquest. We see strength in choosing not to conquer when we could. He gestured toward their various military symbols. Each of your flags represents worlds taken, species subjugated, enemies destroyed. Our flag represents something much more dangerous than that. What could be more dangerous than conquest? Captain Veltara asked. People others want to follow by choice. People who keep their word even when it costs them. People who help their enemies rebuild after the war is over. Rodriguez's voice grew more intense. We didn't just defeat Japan and Germany, we helped them become some of our closest allies. We didn't occupy their worlds and strip their resources. We shared our technology, our trade, our protection. We turned enemies into friends. The concept seemed to physically pain the aliens to contemplate. After World War II, my people had a choice. We were the only ones with nuclear weapons. Our homeland was untouched. Our military was the strongest in the world. We could have conquered anyone we wanted. He let that sink in before continuing. Instead, we created the Marshall Plan. We spent billions of our own resources to rebuild the countries we'd fought against. We helped our enemies become prosperous again. Sub-Commander Nexus spoke hesitantly. But why? What did you gain? Partners instead of slaves, allies instead of subjects, friends instead of conquered territories that would rebel the first chance they got. Rodriguez smiled grimly. That's what you don't understand about strength. Real strength isn't making people afraid of you. Real strength is making them want to stand beside you. General Takamiran's mandibles clicked nervously. This is an unusual philosophy. Is it working? Rodriguez asked simply. Look around this station. How many species here are your willing allies versus your conquered subjects? How many would fight beside you versus fight for you, because they have no choice? The silence was telling. Every human ally chose to be there. Every human friend made that decision freely. When we fight alongside people who believe in the same things we do, not people forced to serve us. Rodriguez moved back toward the flag display. You laughed at this banner because it doesn't show conquered worlds or defeated enemies. But let me tell you what it does show. He pointed to the stripes. 13 colonies that chose unity over division. People who decided they were stronger together than apart. He pointed to the stars. 50 states that joined voluntarily. No conquered territories, no forcible annexation. Just free people choosing to become something greater than themselves. Captain Veltara spoke quietly. And this philosophy, you believe it makes you stronger than conquest? Rodriguez nodded. I know it does. Because when the shooting starts, when everything goes wrong, when the odds are impossible and the cause seems lost, people who chose to be there fight differently than people who were forced to be there. He looked around the circle of aliens. You want to know what our enemies fear about humans? It's not our weapons, though we have good ones. It's not our tactics, though we've gotten good at those too. It's not even our technology. Then what? Commander Zethkar asked. They fear our friends. They fear that we never fight alone. They fear that when they attack us, they're not just fighting Americans or humans. They're fighting everyone who's ever been freed by that flag, everyone who's ever been helped by it, everyone who's ever stood under it and found protection there. Rodriguez's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but every word carried clearly through the silent hall. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, we could have focused solely on Japan. Instead, we chose to fight fascism everywhere it existed. When the Berlin Wall went up, we could have accepted a divided world. Instead, We spent 40 years proving that freedom was stronger than tyranny. When towers fell in New York, we could have glassed the Middle East. Instead, we spent decades hunting down the specific people responsible while trying to build something better. He straightened and looked directly at each alien representative. That flag has flown over more last stands than any banner in human history. Alamo, Bastogne, Khe Sanh, the Twin Towers, places where humans chose to die rather than surrender what they believed in. But why? Sub-Commander Nexus asked, genuine confusion in her voice. Why choose certain death over strategic withdrawal? Rodriguez smiled, and for the first time it was a warm expression. Because that's what the flag means. It means there are things more important than survival, things worth dying for, people worth protecting, principles worth preserving. He turned to face the American flag hanging among the other military symbols. You see a primitive banner with random colors and shapes. I see a promise that no one fights alone, a promise that the strong protect the weak, a promise that evil will always find someone willing to stand against it, no matter the cost. The Master Chief faced the aliens one final time. You asked if this flag has ever inspired fear. Let me tell you something that might help you understand. There are terrorist groups, dictatorships, and hostile species across known space that have a specific term for what happens when they push humans too far. They call it waking the sleeping giant. Rodriguez's eyes grew cold. Because we prefer peace, they mistake us for pacifists. Because we follow laws of war, they think we're weak. Because we try to avoid civilian casualties, they assume we can't fight dirty when we need to. He paused, letting the implications settle. They're wrong on all counts, and by the time they realize it, it's usually too late. General Tokmiran found his voice. You speak as if humans are some kind of unstoppable force. Not unstoppable, Rodriguez corrected. Just very, very hard to stop once we've decided something needs doing. And absolutely impossible to stop when we're protecting something we love. He gestured once more to the flag. That banner represents 300 million people who've chosen to stand together. Behind them stand another 7 billion who share the same basic beliefs about freedom, justice, and protecting the innocent. And behind them, Rodriguez smiled again, and this time there was something predatory in it. Behind them stand the ghosts of everyone who ever died under that flag, everyone who ever bled for it, everyone who ever sacrificed everything they had so that others could be free. The silence stretched for long minutes before Ambassador Chen stepped forward. Honored representatives, I believe this concludes our presentation of Earth's military traditions. Are there any questions? For the first time since the humans had arrived, none of the alien representatives had anything to say. They stood in the shadow of their own misconceptions, finally beginning to understand that they had gravely underestimated what they were welcoming into their alliance. As the gathering dispersed, each alien delegation deep in quiet conversation, Master Chief Rodriguez remained by the flag display. Sub-Commander Nexus approached him hesitantly. Human Rodriguez, she said carefully, may I ask you something? He nodded. If your people are capable of such intensity, why do you show such restraint? Rodriguez looked at the American flag for a long moment before answering. Because, Commander, the hardest thing about having power isn't learning how to use it. It's learning when not to. He turned and walked away, leaving the aliens to contemplate a new understanding of what it truly meant to be strong, and what that red, white, and blue banner really represented in the vast darkness of space.